Good afternoon, everyone. We just give everyone one more minute until we get started. I can see a lot of people are joining right now. I just want to make sure everyone is properly on the call when we get started. Just one more minute. Perfect. And I would say we get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you're joining us today. It's the third session about Fiori authorizations. We already had two sessions where we talked about overview. Last time we did like a deep dive going into Fiori, learning a little bit more about the different tools and fine finesses of Fiori. And today we want to talk more specifically about authorization debugging. Jennifer and I, we received a lot of feedback from you guys. We're very thankful for that. It was very good feedback we got. A lot of questions were also towards, how can we find authorization issues? How can we deal with problems that users face when we implement Fiori, when we add new applications, do an upgrade and stuff like that. So that's why we put the session together today. Initially, we started with just the one session. We only had one session planned. Now it's already a series of 4. So this is the third session. There will be one more in 2 weeks. And today we still want to look into authorization debugging and how can we find authorization issues or issues in general with Fiori. Very often an issue is not always authorization related, even though users, they always think if something's not working, it must be authorization related. That's not always the case. We really want to look into that today. Before we get started, just a few things about housekeeping. For those of you that were in previous webinars, you guys know already. We will have everyone muted during the webinar, so I'll do the primary speaking. Jennifer will be on the back answering questions, so we have the control panel. If you have any questions, just type into the question box, and Jennifer will try to answer them throughout the webinar, so you really get, you can follow the webinar, and if you have any questions, we answer them on the flow. Just maybe very shortly who we are. My name is Alessandro Banzer. I'm located in Tampa, Florida. I'm in charge of the US operations within Exciting. My specialties are sub-access control, GRC, internet access governance, sub-S/4HANA, and Fiori authorizations. And with me today, I have Jennifer. Jennifer, you want to say a few words about yourself? You might be muted.
Sorry, guys. Hi, guys. My name is Jennifer, and I also senior security consultant by Exciting in Switzerland. And I have much experience in S4 authorization projects and Fiori authorization concepts and so on. And today, yes, I'm in the background, and I will keep an eye on your questions. So ask me, and I will answer.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Like last time, we just have the cameras on in the beginning so you guys can see us, the face, but we'll switch it off now so you can have the full screen and we can focus on the content rather than on our face. Perfect. Just a few words about Exciting. We've been founded in 2008 by cybersecurity experts who are still headquartered in Switzerland. We have 80+ employees. We have offices in Germany, Switzerland, England, Romania, and the United States. So we started here in the United States specifically in 2016. Most of our senior consultants are also SAP trainers. So we have a very special relationship with SAP. We're a sub-silver partner. We have specialized recognized expertise in certain areas like GRC, data security, and so on. But then also we have a very good relationship with SAP Education. So if you book an SAP training, they're likely, let's say you book a Fiori authorization training, they're likely you're going to talk to Jennifer or myself, because most of our senior consultants, they also train SAP trainings for SAP. Perfect. So today we just want to get started with a little bit of basics. For those of you that joined previous sessions, it's basically just what we discussed previously, just to get started. What is it that we have to talk about, and then we specifically want to look into how can we troubleshoot and debug authorization issues or issues that we think are authorization related that we have to find. And we as a security person or as a basis person, more so as a security person, we're always faced with issues that we have to troubleshoot and find out what's the root cause of an issue. Also today, we want to specifically talk about the CDS views. That's a new type of authorization check, so to say, with S/4HANA and Fiori. That very often causes issues, especially authorization-related issues where people or users are not able to see certain information, but we don't see anything in the trace, and that's because there's an access control through an CDS view that works a little bit differently than we're used to from the past. So we want to specifically talk about that as well, and then in the end, we'll just want to give an outlook what is the next webinar about, and also where you can find more information. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, like I said, just type into the question box, and then Jennifer will try to answer them throughout the webinar. And we'll also, send out a summary of all the questions with all the answers to all of you, together with the recording and the slide deck.
Alessandro, sorry for the interruption. Is it possible that you assign me the moderator role, because I don't see the question box currently? So
sure. Sorry about that. Let me just do that. Perfect. Now you should be able to do that. Sorry about that. All right. So
no, I can see it.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
We remember from last time, there's different deployment scenarios, how we can deploy Fiori. We talked about an embedded approach, central hub approach. Here I just have one slide. I really consolidated into one. With Fiori, traditionally, there's two different ways we can deploy. But in both scenarios, we have a front-end server and we have a back-end server. That's basically our gateway, and then the back-end server behind that. And that can be an S/4HANA system, that could be a GRC system, a solution manager, whatever that backend server might be. What's important for us to understand is that for an end user, in order to access the Fiori launchpad, there's certain authorizations that need to be given on the front-end server and then also on the back-end server. And that's also important to understand and be aware of that, especially when we troubleshoot authorizations, because that could be that we're missing front-end authorizations. For example, users are not able to see a tile or a card, depending on the naming we use here. An application in Fiori might be because it's not assigned to a front-end role. Let's say we have an embedded scenario, we build one role, but if we have a central hub deployment where we have a backend and a separate front-end server, it might be that we only updated the front end or we only updated the backend role, but not both, and that could cause an issue. So we have to understand our architecture, how Fiori is deployed, and also what is important from a security aspect. We remember when it comes to authorizing users in Fiori, an end user needs a catalog that comes with applications and the configurations to the applications, and then we can also use different groups in a way to basically group and make the look and feel for the end users better when they log on to the Fiori launchpad. With S/4HANA 2020, we also have spaces and pages, basically that the groups kind of got a little, there's a new functionality called pages and spaces. We talked about that briefly in the last webinar, but at the same time, it's still similar as it is on the old Fiori world, so to say. And important, on the front-end server, a user needs a catalog, a group, and then the front-end OData services, which is required for a user to start and see a tile. And then in the backend server is the same thing. We need a catalog, we need the backend authorizations, and those basically are the authorizations that at the end of the day control what the user can see within an application. So to summarize that, on the front-end server, we have a catalog that authorizes me an app. We can assign that app from a catalog to a group for display purposes. The front-end authorizations control whether a user can see the app, yes or no. But then basically what the user can do within that app, that's controlled in the backend, so the backend authorization. So for example, which company code a user can access to, all that stuff, that's dealt, or that has to be dealt in the backend. When we talk about authorization issues, and I put it here into brackets because, like I said, not everything is a true authorization issue. especially with Fiori, when we roll out Fiori, when we implement Fiori, very often there's issues that users report that are not authorizations. Could be because the service is inactivated. It's because they removed a tile from their group, for example, it doesn't show up anymore. There could be different reasons, which is not necessarily an authorization, but very often it's just generalized in it's an authorization issue. It's not working, it must be authorizations. So very common issues, and issues that we see very commonly is, users that have missing tiles, missing groups. They cannot see them for whatever reason. Could be that they see an application, but when they click on that application, they cannot start it because there might be the OData services in the background, which is not active, or some SICF nodes are not activated, certain things like that. And we'll get into more of those specifically here in just a little bit. What I already mentioned, the CDS views, we'll have a couple of slides regarding CDS views because that's a big one, where everything seems to be working fine, but then let's say a user cannot see certain things. We switch on a trace, we don't see anything, there's nothing in SU53. All the services are activated, but they still cannot see the data. That could be because it's consuming the data from a CDS view, which works a little bit different. That's what we have to understand. Or, and that's also very often, we have missing authorizations. So very true failed authorizations that we can see in the trace, that we can see in SU53, really authorizations that were just forgotten, or we didn't add them at all, or they were purposely not authorized. That can still be an issue as well. And then also other things like, from a configuration perspective, where we could potentially have, false system alias in the target mapping or for the applications, different configurations that also can be wrong that we have to change along the way. And then also, like I mentioned, a very common one, we discussed that briefly at the end of the last webinar. When I create a group, or when I create a group, I can allow personalization. So basically whether the user can change the apps and remove and add apps to a group or not. So if I enable personalization, every user for himself can move around the apps if they want to. And what we know, that it's good and bad. Personalization is nice, for advanced users, they can change the look and feel and can put the transactions the way they want to have them. But at the same time, it's bad because if someone doesn't know what they're doing and they remove certain applications from a group, then it doesn't show up anymore. And then they say, oh, the app is gone, someone took my authorizations. Not so much. It's just because you removed an application from a group, which causes the issue, and then we have to basically train the users again how to get back the app and stuff like that. So it's also a lot of things that can cause interruptions that we have to be aware of and that we have to understand and to figure out how we can deal with that. Like I mentioned last time, there's a lot of different tools, troubleshooting tools that we can use. The good thing is that Fiori and backend servers are still an ABAP environment, especially if you talk about the on-premise world. It's a little bit different when we go to the cloud. But on the on-premise world, we still have an ABAP stack, which means we still can use the ABAP transactions like STAUTHTRACE, which is basically the system trace ST01. We can also use SU53 to find authorization issues. If there's a user that has an authorization failure, true authorization failure, those tools will still work. We can still switch on a trace. We can find what's causing the issue. What's important for those of you that are not aware of STAUTHTRACE and still using ST01 trace, with Fiori, we kind of are forced to use STAUTHTRACE because those CDS views and the problems with CDS views, they only show up in STAUTHTRACE and not in ST01 or in SU53. So if you're still using ST01 and you don't use STAUTHTRACE, it's a good time to now really make the move and go to STAUTHTRACE. It's also a global trace. There's a lot of different things that that you can benefit from. ST01 is if you switch it on, it's still a local trace on your application server. With STAUTHTRACE, we can do that globally for all application servers, regardless on which one the user logs onto. Different things. The reporting capabilities is better. We have a better table view and different things, and we can do different. We can jump into different attributes, like for example the CDS, which I'll show that here in just a little bit. So all those instruments and those tools are still available when it comes to finding authorization issues. What we then also have is from the gateway or from the services that are being started is the error log on the front end and on the back end. So there's two different transactions. So depending on your deployment scenario, whether you're on an embedded or on a central hub, you have to understand on which server you are, on which server you review or try to troubleshoot, because depending on whether you're on the front end or on the back end server, you have to run or execute the right transaction. So there's a backend error log and there's a front end error log. If you have an embedded scenario, it doesn't matter, it's the same server. But if you have a central hub, then you have to know which transaction to run on which server. That's important. Very often what we see issues from the error log, commonly seen is, when we have services which are not activated, stuff like that, or if you have a trusted RFC issue where we have the sRFC ACL object missing or not properly authorized, those stuff will show up in the error log from the gateway. Then there's different transactions as well, which are or should be known to us, like the system log SM20. If there's a dump, so let's say there's an issue with the program, if it dumps for whatever reason, or different reasons, that's still ST22, so still the same transaction. We can use the application log in SLG1 to find authorization, already the problem at all with the application. That's still there. We can still use all the traces. Like I said, we can use STAUTHTRACE, the system trace, but we can also use HTTP trace. We can use SQL trace. We can use all those traces that were available. And then on top of that, and that's also one I want to specifically show today, is the developer tools in your web browser. So if you're using Chrome or Internet Explorer or even Edge or Firefox or any other browser out there, they all should come with developer tools where we can basically start a console and we can see what's going on the website. So because Fiori is a web application, and we can basically look into what's going on with that web page or website. And that's specifically one I want to point out here. Today I'm going to do a quick demo how we can use that. So there's different tools. Some of them, again, we know them from the past. A few are new that we have to understand, especially that integration with the OData services, that they have to be activated, stuff like that, which will very often come up in the error logs, as well those tools we have to use. I have 2-3 common errors that we commonly see that's just good to understand. We see different error codes. Some of you might know them, but there's different error codes like 403, 404. There's different error codes when you browse. I mean, you probably experience that when you just browse the internet. So those are similar error codes, but in the view of Fiori, what's important is, for example, the 403 errors. That could be because there's an error in loading tiles. It's because fact sheets cannot be displayed, because there's no services registered for a certain namespace. There could be different errors that are going under the 403 error. All those errors, the 403 errors, basically means that there's something that's not working. An error is always something that's not working, right? But most of them really are because the OData services are not active, they're not registered, or they're missing altogether. There's different transactions how we can check that. So if a user sees that error, submits a ticket, ServiceNow ticket, or however you handle your tickets, and you see a 403, then you can check. Very certainly, you have to check the OData services, and here are some transactions that help you check that. So, for example, we can use the content manager to scan our catalogs to make sure that all the services behind my applications are activated and active and are properly working. That's more a proactive task that we discussed last time when we talked about the content manager. We should always do that when we roll out Fiori and we authorize certain catalogs, making sure all the services are activated, they're properly authorized. All that stuff should be done already up front to be proactive. But then, from time to time, we upgrade the system. The system is always changing, right? So there could always be problems. So the content manager might be a good one to find and check services in a catalog. We can use the task list in STC01 transaction. Talk about that as well. There's different, rapid activation functionality where we can also activate tasks and certain things. But then also from the gateway where we have a service maintenance transaction. Oops. Okay, I don't know what happened now. Sorry about that. where we can also manually activate a service. So let me just jump into the system very quickly to show you a 403 error and how that looks, because it's always good to show you a quick demo how that looks. So I just go to my S/4HANA system. I log on here with my test user. I start the Fiori launchpad. We can see we are now in the Internet Explorer, just as my default browser here. And I can see I'm the user. I log on. I have basically one group assigned to myself that's called Webinar Authorization Debugging. I have 2 apps here. And let's just click on the second one here, which is I just added a random app from all the available apps that I have in my system. And when what we can see, it already popped up basically here, we now get an error. So we have an error here, gives us an error. We can click on show details to see a little bit more. But basically here it says service failed. This time it says service failed. Sometimes we get the 403, whatever it is. But basically what it tells me now is there's a service that's not working. So there's different ways how we can solve that. One thing, like I mentioned, we can go into the catalog and find that. If I'm here and I see that myself, I could, for example, also use the debugging tools from the web browser. So if I go here to the tools, it's called developer tools. In Chrome it looks a little different, but you will find them. Developer tools. It basically opens like split window here, and then right now we don't see anything. So what we now have to do, if you have an error and we start the developer tools, I always go to the console. So the console is basically what Jennifer and I are mostly interested in. Here we find our issues. Right now it's empty. So what we have to do is we have to restart or refresh the site. So I just refresh, and now we can see down here there's a lot of events happening. So basically whatever is green is usually good. So right now you see I started the launchpad, everything was green, not a problem. Let's click on that again, because that's where we got the error. And now you can already see there's a lot of stuff coming in red. So that, and red always indicates, and that's the error I see here, that there was something wrong. So either something was not found, or there was an error, an issue, and so on. And here, this is now very cryptic, I would say. It's difficult to read. So it takes a little bit of practice and experience to understand the console here. Over time, you get better at it and you know what to look for. But now basically, for example, here, we can see that we have an error code 403. Here we can see, we couldn't see it here, but now here we can see it. And it basically says cannot load metadata for service. And so basically what it says, or it tells me, is that service is missing, or it's not activated, it's not registered, it's not working. So I'm missing configuration. That's not necessarily an authorization issue here. But again, often report as an authorization problem, but now I'm missing a service. So for example, those developer tools, that's why I quickly wanted to show them, very helpful to see what's going on the web page on Fiori, to find issues here. And again, different issues will come up here. There's a lot of good blogs out there that talk about the console, how to use it. We'll share links to a couple of good documents as well for, where you can find more about debugging in the console, and so on. So this is one way to find it. I know now which service it is. I could go in manually and activate. Let me show another way as well. So if I go in as an admin, and we could, for example, use the error log. So the sub gateway error log, the transaction I just mentioned, where we have to be careful whether we're on the backend or front end. Here I'm in an embedded scenario, so it doesn't matter. So let's just check on that on the front end. What happened? I just execute that transaction, and then here I can basically see the same thing. So I can see here, there's different error messages because I purposely created some, but here we can basically see the same thing. No service found for namespace. So we're missing a service, and it also gives me that service name here. So again, I can find it in the developer tools. I can find it here. There's different tools. I can find it. I could also go, just to show it, the more proactive way through, for example, the content manager. So if I know the catalog and I'm building a catalog, let's say I just built a catalog and I want to roll it out for testing purposes, or I have to transport it. And I just want to see if everything is active. So I can basically select my catalog. I already created it, obviously, so I don't have to do that here. But this is the catalog that's assigned to my user. And then here again, like I showed last time, in the content manager, we can basically say, check the services. We can just check them, or we can also check and show them. And we just run that. And now basically what the content manager is doing, it checks all the applications that are in that catalog and sees whether they are functioning or not. And if we can see the same thing here, we can see for my service that the OData service is inactive or does not exist. So it has not been activated yet. The good thing is when we use the content manager, again, that's more a tool, I would say, to be proactive. So rather than having the user report me an error, I use the content manager to find them up front so that I don't run into that issue. And I would activate that directly from here. So if I see that's, here, that example one is missing, I could directly from here go into that, service maintenance transaction. You can see it here when I hover over the button, where I could, already or directly from here, jump into the transaction, activate and maintain that specific service that is missing here. I want to show that here, but it's just more so to find the tools that allow us to do that. So different ways to find a problem. Again, those 403 errors, they're very common, especially when we implement Fiori the first time because it needs to be activated. If we didn't do it up front, and then we will run into those. Once Fiori is deployed and it's running, those 403 should basically go away because once it's active, it's active. It's not something that we're missing or is user specific. That's a one-time thing basically to activate them. But when we deploy and roll out Fiori the very first time, we might see a lot of those 403s. Others that we commonly see are the 500 errors where we have requests failed. And that's then more, that could be more user specific. It could still be because a service is not activated in transaction SICF, so it's not, it exists but not activated, could still be, but very often it's also missing authorization related. And that's mainly because of missing authorization in the backend. So for example, it could be the SRFC ACL object is missing or not properly authorized. So those 500 errors, they're more, more common from a user perspective. So not every user might have the same error, where the 403 usually, that's the same for every user if they're on the app. The 500s could also be because they're user specific with user specific authorizations. One other thing that we specifically want to talk about today is those CDS views. With Fiori S/4HANA SAP changed the way access controls are basically are working when we pull or read data from the database. And that's from an architectural, we'll see it on the next slide. It's a significant change from the old approach and the new approach, and that's why it causes a lot of problems, and it's also difficult for us to find CDS-related authorization problems. What's basically the changes with the CDS views, and I'll show that in just a second, is that the authorizations are now not really checked after the data has been pulled from a table. It's proactive upfront. So basically, it's only pulling authorizations that I need or data that I have authorizations to. It's not pulling everything and then filters out what I don't have authorization for and will filter it out. So basically, the more logic is happening on the database, and I only get the data back that I am authorized to see. That makes it more performant, so faster and better, less resource intense. That makes it a little bit more tricky for us to find authorization related problems when CDS views are used. There are, however, like always, there's a problem, there's a solution, or hopefully there's a solution. I'll show you one transaction where we can use a runtime simulator to test authorizations with CDS views in the context of your user or also a foreign user. If it's not your user, you want to use a test user, for example, how that works, I'll show you that as well. So why is CDS views difficult? When we compare the classical approach, how code works, or how, when let's say we read data from a table. So in the past, basically the code selected data from a table like I have here. Let's say we read a table, like I have one example down here. So the code does a SQL statement, select star from table. And in this example, let's say we select from this table here. We have 6 different lines, 6 different items in that table. So the SQL would select star from table, everything from that table. So basically, I get back from the database 6 items, and then the code will check which of those 6 items I can access. I have authorizations for, and the check, for example, could be on the company code, like Booker's here, the company code. So you can see that there's 3 different company codes, and what's happening here basically is, again, we're selecting 6 data sets, and then we're checking which ones I'm authorized for. Let's say the user has only authorization to 1000 and 2000 on the Bookers, which is being checked. I would only be able to see 3 records. So I would only see 3 out of those 6 items that are in the table. But that's basically happening in the code. So the data is already pulled, and then in the code there's logic that basically filters out that I'm not allowed to see, and then the code ultimately will only show me the ones I'm authorized to. With the new approach, this changes. So basically, the code still runs and selects data from a table, but instead of just selecting star and everything, it does it with a where clause. For those of you that speak some SQL, this will make a lot of sense. So basically, it will select from the same table, the one down here, but only the ones that the user is authorized for. And I just showed it here in a simplified way. So basically, if I run that statement, or the code runs that statement with that CDS view, or that new approach, then it will only select me, because I'm only authorized to 1000, 2000, it will only select me the first 3 items, and that's what comes back. So basically, instead of getting 6 items back and then filter it out in the code, I will only get the 3 back that I'm authorized for. The problem with that is, in the classical approach, we will see if there's more items, and I select the star. There will be more items, and then I will see, because I don't have the authorization, I will see an authorization failure when I run a trace. So for example, I will get return code 0s for company code 1000 and 2000, but then I have a return code, for example, 4 for company code 3000, because I'm not authorized for that. And I can clearly see when I trace or when I run SU53 why it is failing, because I'm missing the company code authorization. With the new approach, this now changes. So the return code will always be 0. I mean, you still have to have certain authorizations, but let's say we have. The return code will be 0, and I will just see the first 3 line items, because those are the ones I'm authorized for. But I don't see the 3 down here for company code 3000, because I don't have it. And I don't have that, I don't see that in the trace, that I don't have the authorization for company code 3000, because I don't have the authorization for it, so it's not even be selected, and that's why there's no failed authorization check. And this is a big problem. Jennifer was just telling me a story from a customer where there were two girls doing the same job, and one of the girls saw more data than the other, and they had no authorization failures. They should have the same, they had different roles, and then Jennifer found out it's because the one user has a little more authorization than the other, which we have to find through the CDS views. It's not something that will show up in a trace or in SU53, or if you look into that. So how can we find those? Because it's a problem. Someone cannot see data, or sees less data than someone else, or missing data, and we don't see an authorization failure, but it's still because of the authorizations. So that's why I said earlier, if you guys are using the system trace, you should now use STAUTHTRACE. STAUTHTRACE, it's still using the ST01 trace, it's still the same trace, but STAUTHTRACE, the new transaction, comes with so much more stuff and information that we can read, from the trace. So for example, different transactions, like here, I'm showing it in the example of a transaction MM03. When we do an example in the system, I think we'll see, we might see a Fiori application, not sure what I have maintained. But so basically here we can see in an S/4HANA system, the application that we're using is MM03, still a transaction code, but could be started from Fiori or from a sub GUI, it doesn't matter. And it's now using a CDS view. So that's what we can see here. So there's now new columns, access filtering and CDS view entity, for example. And here we can now see which CDS entity is used to do the access control in that transaction. To get into that CDS entity, because right now here it doesn't really tell us a lot, so you still have to figure out what it really is behind that. We can select the line like I did here. We select the line, and then we can click here on CDS access control, and that now brings us into the control of how it is defined, and there we can see what authorization checks are being maintained. So let me show you that. So if I click on an access control, we have that access control name. If I go back one step, that's basically here, the one, the name here that we can see. If I click here, then I have that screen here. And then basically here, I can see how is that attribute or that access control defined. And then here I can basically see, okay, there's certain authorization objects, fields, and values that are being checked. And that's now happening here. This is now just an example with MM03. There's hundreds of them now. So SAP is really pushing those CDS views. They're getting more popular, and they're a great thing because it makes the system more performant, but makes it a little trickier for us. So here for one, I can see what are the checks that are being happening. And for example, let's say user doesn't see certain, this example here would be on the field Bagru. Let's say the user had used Bagru and there's different material groups. The user only sees certain. It's because for Bagru, he only has certain authorizations. Now we're very deep into the authorizations, but that's what we need to understand and what we have to go, or where we have to go to find those authorization problems. And let me show that in the system, because here it's very theoretical, but I also want to show you in the system. Before I jump there, just one thing. For those CDS views, for those access controls, there's a runtime simulator we can use in transaction SACM, where we can basically, for myself or for another user, I can simulate the authorization query. So I can see what are the authorizations that are being checked, and from there, then I can figure out what is not missing. Because again, I won't see it in the trace. I will not see what is failing in the trace. I really have to figure it out myself, and that's the tricky part of those CDS authorizations. So let's just jump back into the system. I had a trace on already, so I don't want to waste time in running a trace and doing that. But basically here we can see I have my test user. Let's just go and evaluate the trace. So this is, for those of you who don't know, STAUTHTRACE. This is STAUTHTRACE. Little different, or definitely different than ST01. And then here, I can see the user, what type of application was run, could be a transaction or Fiori, different things. You can see the name, what program, and then also the result of the authorization check. If I go a little bit further to the right, I might have to scroll. Let me go back one step. I think we have to go a little bit further back because I did the test before, a little earlier. Sorry about that. Okay, so here in the very first couple of columns, we can see that I had a check. I think it was on MM03. Let me just go back a little bit. So I was running MM03 on an S4HANA system now, and then we can see here. I had a couple of 04s, but we might also be interested in, let's say it's all green, everything is fine, but there's still something missing. Then I can see what's the CDS view here. So we can see in this time it's just one. Some transactions, they use multiple. So there are multiple CDS views that you will see here. In this example here, for what I just tested earlier, it was just the one. Again, to look into those views, so if you click on it, it will not work. So this will just give you the fields. What you really have to do, you have to select the line, and then you have to click on CDS access control. So click up here, it will change the screen, and then here we can basically see that access control that's being used, and then in here we can see how it is defined, and then here we can understand, or we can see what are the values or objects, field values that are being checked, and that the user has to have authorizations for. So for example here for MATIMAT, material master authorizations, by looking for an activity F4. That's basically the input help. That's new with, I think, 1909, Jennifer, right? That was introduced. New authorization objects from the GDPR regulations. And it's basically checking on the field background if I have authorization, to click the F4 button, for different material types, for example. And from here, then I have to go back and find out what is missing. And to do that, there's that cockpit that we can use. So what I always do is basically I control that, I copy paste that access control, because that's the one I wanna test. I go back. Before I go there, I just have to switch off my trace, because right now I'm using the trace. And then I go into that transaction that I mentioned, SACM. And that's basically my access control management transaction, where I have different things, so I can look into the objects and do certain things. But for us as a security person, what's interesting is that Runtime Simulator. I click here, and then I'm in that simulator. So now I can basically select my CDS entity, and just you can search for it manually here. But you can see there's more than 5,000 entities. There's I don't even know how many there are, but there's a lot of them. So it makes it very hard to find. That's why I said copy and paste the one you're looking for. You can either search it here, or you just type it in. But it's better to just copy and paste. And then basically what we can do is we can analyze or simulate that entity, the authorization for that access control for that entity for a certain user. So right now I'm just doing it for myself. Let's just run it very quickly to see what happens if I execute. What's now basically happening is we get a SQL trace where I can see, okay, what happened, if what's happening there. It's basically a select count from certain table, and then here it is that access control being used with the authorizations. And then here I can basically see what are the authorization objects from PFC perspective that the user has to have in order to execute or to access the data. So we can basically see here whether the user has the authorizations. I mean, in my example here, I have sub all, so I can do that. So everything's okay, but we can also do that, for other users, because for me as an admin, doesn't matter too much. I'm more interested for end users. So let's say an end user, like in the story I just told from Jennifer, where one user was able to see more data and the other not, and she had to figure it out. What we do in such examples is basically we go back here in that Runtime Simulator, and we can do the authorization query for another user. The difficulty here, it's a little unfortunate, it's just the way it is we have to know the password of another user. So let's say we want to simulate in a productive environment, because that's where the issue is. We will not get the password of someone else. So if I say, okay, I want to test for Jenny, she will not give me her password. That's against any security policy out there. So what we usually do is we just copy a productive user into a test user, and then we change the password for that test user, and then we can analyze that. And we can also do it in development if you have the roles properly transported and they say the same in dev as in prod. You can also run that analysis in development, even though, because it's pulling data from tables and looking into, I would probably say it's better to do in production, but it will be possible. So if I want to do for another user, we enter the username, we type in the password. I hope I remember the password, and then we execute, and then we can see basically in the aspect of that user. Okay, in that system, for whatever reason, it's not working. Okay, I didn't test that, but it should be working. It might be my demo system. A lot of things are always a little out of shape. But here again, you can test for your own user if you have an issue yourself, or you can go and check the authorizations for the CDS entity for another user as well to see what is being checked and which authorizations the user have to have. Again, it's not showing you what are failed authorizations. It's showing you which objects and values are being checked. And then from there, you have to go into the roles and figure out what the user has. So let's, in my example here, again, let me go in again. Should have taken a screenshot earlier. I mean, I have full authorizations. That's why it's, it's showing me the full. So I have basically star, I have sub all. But let's say I have multiple roles and I don't have a star, I have specific values. It would show me the specific values I have here, with the field and values. And then from there, I can find out what is missing that I still have to add to the role. Again, it's a manual process. We have to go back manually into PFCG and add that authorization back. But that's important. So those CDS views, we will see them all over the place. If I go back two steps here, again, it's a different approach. It's a good approach from a security perspective. It's a great approach. It makes the system more performant, more reliable. And but for us to find out issues, let's say user reports something, to really find what's missing, it's a little more tricky than it used to be, because beforehand we were just able to go into the trace, be it SU53 or the authorization trace, and know exactly what's failing, and then we add that. Now we have to do a little bit more digging, and we have to find it ourselves. That's from that perspective, for us, it makes it a little bit harder. From an overall security perspective, it's the right way to do, because it's better for the system, it's better for security, and that's why it's the right way to do. But for us, we really have to understand, why that's happening, and why it is so important to understand that, and and then also how to find the problem and how we can solve them. Perfect. Jenny, I'm pretty much done with the demos. Do we have any questions that we maybe want to demo? Because today we were a little bit quicker, because we figured maybe there's a couple of questions we can answer live in the session. Anything that we a lot of questions.
We have a lot of questions, yes, and I answered it directly, but I will look on the window. And
anything that you think
we have many questions about the CDS view, so maybe it's possible that we create a step-by-step documentation after the session to explain in detail what the user has to do for troubleshooting. Yeah, okay. I think that is it's maybe a good idea. Yeah, to help our participants to do a troubleshooting. Yeah. Okay. I will create a really small step-by-step documentation for CDS troubleshooting, and then you can send it to all participants after the session. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Jenny, maybe that I just saw like a few questions. Like one question was whether the authorization checks are different in a Fiori application than they are compared to an ECC transaction. So for example, we have approved purchase order as an application in Fiori, and we have the legacy transaction ME29. Are the authorization checks completely different, or they're similar?
The authorization is similar. It's depend on the application Fiori type. Okay, it is important to note that Fiori apps has two types. Legacy use a transaction or WebDynpro application in the background, so the authorization checks are similar. Okay, but when the Fiori app is a new Fiori app, a new type, a UR5 type, then the authorization check, the start condition is the authorization object as service, and then the system will check more authorization objects in the program code. Okay, but yes, the start condition is as service. For UI5 applications into Fiori Launchpad, and for the legacy apps, transaction or WebDynpro application, the start condition is as T-code or as start. And then the system checks also business objects, material management or finance or controlling and so on.
Yeah. Okay. And then there was a couple of questions or more comments, I would say, were regarding the, that what I'm just showing here with the Runtime Simulator. I mean, some of you were pointing out that how could SAP even think of providing a password? Jennifer, we asked the same question. There's one question, Jennifer, in that regard. Do you see it? Is it a problem, or have you had any problems like doing or creating a test user in production to do a simulation, or you primarily do it in quality or in a validation system?
Yeah, maybe production system is a critical system, okay? So, but the problem is you can also test it in the dev system, yeah, but you have to check if the role version in your dev system is the same as in the production system, because maybe you did any changes in the dev system and you are not imported these changes in the quality or in the production system, yeah? And so you have different versions of roles, and maybe the analysis of the error is not the same in the dev and quality as in the production system. But if you check that the role version in production and quality and dev is the same, then it's okay. Then you create a dev a test user in the dev or in the quality system. And if you have any changes in the roles, yeah, maybe you added a new transaction or a new Fiori app, and these changes are not imported in the quality or in the production system, then you have problems with the troubleshooting, yeah, and then you should create the test user only in the production system, okay? So set a validity date for 2 days, and then it's okay for the auditor and the revisor, yeah. Yeah. I think my recommendation is check it in the production system, because the error is in the production system, and then it is easier to find out what the problem is.
Yeah. Perfect. There was also a question, if I put you on the spot here now, but I know you know all the questions on top of your head, regarding the CDS views. Is that something that's mandatory, or is it something the customer can decide whether they want to use it or not?
No, it's mandatory. And CDS views are also available in the old world, in the ECC system, but SAP uses CDS views in S/4HANA exclusively. Yeah, that means you will see that SAP changed the authorization concept of transaction, WebInfo, or data service. They will use CDS views. Yeah, so it's really mandatory CDS view. You have not the possibility to decide I would like to use the classical approach. Yeah, that is not possible. That's the decision is, or SAP decide for you that they will use CDS views in their programs. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. There's a few more questions. Like I said, we will get to all of them by email. Jennifer already mentioned we'll put together a guide on the CDS views, because it looks like that's a big issue for a lot of people. So we'll put a slide deck together for that and send it out. If you guys have any questions, just feel free to reach out and we'll try to answer them. Just a quick outlook to the next webinar in 2 weeks' time. So the first 3 webinars, including today, was basically everything that comes with SAP standards. So we looked into primarily into SAP standard functionality. Some of you already pointed out a little bit tricky or time-consuming. For that, we have alternatives, or we have automation tools. Some of you know the XAMS. So XAMS is a suite of tools. It's an ABAP add-on used by over 500 customers worldwide. That comes from our company, that basically deals with the entire authorization management, not just for the legacy, but also for Fiori, S/4HANA migration, Fiori implementations, and so on. And what we basically want to show in the next webinar is primarily on that third-party solution. It's a third-party solution, but it's a certified SAP solution recommended by SAP, by Subnode, even SAP themselves are using it. That specifically talks about how we can do everything that I showed you, or Jennifer and I showed you in the last 3 sessions in standard. How can we automate and do it better, faster, more efficient? There's a lot of things that in SAP standard not available, especially the mass functionality, the mass changes, mass testing, integration capabilities, finding personalization issues, different things that pop up. So, when you implement Fiori, all that stuff has been added to our solution to make your life easier. So basically be more efficient when you do authorization projects, Fiori implementations, upgrades, stuff like that. And that's specifically the next webinar. So we'll primarily be talking about our solution, how we can help, and how we help over 500 customers making their authorization life easier. That will be all in the next session. Also here on the next slide, I have the link for the next session. So like I said, we'll send out all the recordings from today. We'll have one more session in 2 weeks. If you guys are interested and want to learn how automation tools can help you to be more efficient, more happy you guys join. What we also offer are different customer workshops. So if you see you have a need to receive training or do workshops, we offer customer specific workshops that 1, 2, 3 days depending on the need and what you want to do. We talk about S/4HANA migrations, Fiori implementations, all that stuff. Like I said, we're all our senior consultants are SAP trainers, so we have a lot of experience from education perspective. But we also do offer customer specific workshops, really sitting down with you and help you implement, train on Fiori, on S/4HANA, or anything else related to SAP security. With that being said, thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the session. We have one more in 2 weeks' time. Again, if you have any questions, here's my email address. Just feel free to reach out to us. We try to answer all the questions. We answered a lot of emails in the past couple of weeks. Sometimes I've been a little bit slow over Christmas with replying. Apologize for that. Should be better next 2 weeks. Again, just reach out to us if you have any questions. If you need a webinar or a specific session, and want to talk about more specifically in your context, just let us know. With that being said, thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day.